Hey everyone, there's not a shortage of financial advisors in our industry. It seems like there's one on just about every corner, but not all advisors are the same. They range in skill, experience, and capability. And today we're going to talk about how to know whether or not you've outgrown your financial advisor. And to do that, we've looped in our Director of Operations, Chase Adler, who has a wealth of industry experience working with many different companies. And we're going to talk about how simply holding a license doesn't tell the full story. So, Chase, we meet with families every day in this office, and, you see that as our Director of Operations here. And, with that, the families that we, just alone today, I think 6 families in this office that we met one-on-one with. And many of those families are currently working with other advisors, all kinds of advisors in big firms, small firms, that we see, on their end. How do we go about distinguishing and helping them to see, what a good advisor or maybe a bad fit is on their end? There are over 300,000 advisors in our industry. Which ones are good and which ones maybe aren't doing the best job for them? How do we see that? How do we recognize that?
Yeah, it's an incredibly nuanced question, but I think we can make it really simple for everybody.
Yep.
There are good advisors, there are bad advisors. I've seen them all. I've worked at big industry players like Charles Schwab and Morgan Stanley. Part of my job here at EdgeRock is to be super critical of our business. And one of the exciting things I get to do is go talk to other RIAs, other players in our industry to see what they're doing. I get invited in all the time and get to kind of see how they operate and what their skill sets are. So I think I've got a pretty good perspective, and I've seen a lot of, kind of movie reference, obviously, but good, bad, and ugly, right? We've seen it all. We see it all every day. I think in the 6 people we've had in the office today, we've seen that full gambit. And we talk about this all the time because we want to make sure that we are always the right advisor for the people that we're talking to and our clients. So I think we're going to, spend some time today, try to make this as simple as possible, have a few laughs along the way probably, and define what are those top 10 things where you can go ahead and say like, hey, I've probably outgrown my advisor.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the top 10 reasons why you may have outgrown your current advisor. And I think it's going to be easy to define these areas. And, when we're looking at it, they're good doctors, bad doctors. They're good teachers, bad teachers. You see everything in every industry. And it's funny, when my dad graduated medical school, one of the things that he years later asked me, he asked Kyle, the person that graduated last in our class, do you know what they still call that person? Doctor.
A doctor.
Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I still want to see them, right?
Yeah.
So you can earn all kinds of certifications in this industry, CFP, whatever it may be, and we have a lot of CFPs here. Hopefully we have the right ones. I think we've got a great team on that end, but let's talk about, defining maybe what to look for when it comes to not having the greatest experience and maybe that situation where we may have outgrown that advisor. So I think number one off the bat, one that I see all the time is if your advisor isn't available to you when you call or reach out or email, that advisor isn't communicating with you. They're not responsive. And I see that a lot, especially in the summertime. Our industry tends to slow down.
Yep.
Advisors take off. I have a lot of friends, I'm trying not to throw them under the bus, but a lot of people in our industry that have become good friends of mine over my 30 years that I know they take off and they go on vacation in the summer and they're not available. And we've heard about it here in the last couple of weeks where other families are trying to get a hold of their advisors. Maybe you can hit on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a big pet peeve of mine as well. When people come into our office and they tell us they just can't get a hold of their advisor, and you kind of hit on it, even if the lowest graduating doctor in the class is still an MD, right? They're still a doctor. It doesn't matter if your advisor has an alphabet soup after their name of CFP, CFA, any of the credentials that are out there, and there's a lot of them. If they don't answer the phone, if they're not available to you, they're not an advisor. They're not advising you if they are not talking to you. And we try to be proactive here. We try to make sure we're setting meetings with our clients, that we're constantly in communication with them, but we are also very reactive. We want to make sure that we're available for them all the time. And so it's really kind of a pet peeve of mine when I hear other offices aren't doing the same. And we actually had a really weird story come up this week. This one kind of blew my mind, actually. One of our advisors is meeting with a new potential client. Really great fit for us. And, we're having a really great conversation with them. And, their takeaway was, I need to be talking to my advisor more. I need to ask them about some of the questions I'm talking about EdgeRock with to make the determination, should I stay with this person or should I go? Have I outgrown my advisor, right? Should I go on with EdgeRock? And they try to set an appointment with that advisor. That advisor's office, the advisor never got back to them, but the office staff got back to them and said, well, we can make an appointment for you, but it'll be in 2 months.
2 months.
2 months.
You would hope it, would be something that where they would be more responsive and can get you in, and not take 2 months just to sit down.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure that any advisors in that high demand.
I think an amazing sign that you've outgrown your advisors if they think they've outgrown you, right? If they're not going to see you for 2 months, I don't know the particular circumstances. Right. I don't know if this is a good advisor, bad advisor. I got my opinion on it now, of course, right?
Right.
If the advisor's not willing to meet with you for 2 months, you're probably not that important to them.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel like your advisor thinks you're important, then you've outgrown your advisor.
Yep.
100%.
Yep. That's a great point there. And if we, I think looking at another one here, if you don't have an actual plan. Now, this is a big one. Right. We have a team of CFPs, certified financial planners, that meet with every family that comes through here, and every family gets or receives a financial plan. Right. I think the thing that a lot of families don't understand is, well, what is a financial plan? It's not just a projection on a piece of paper where you plug in, here are my investments, and let's plug in a rate of return. Let's plug in some inflation numbers, hit a button. Am I running out of money or not? Yeah. That is not a financial plan. When someone goes through the certification of becoming a certified financial planner, financial planning has 5 key areas. It's creating income during retirement. It's managing your investments and portfolios the right way. It's tax planning. It's healthcare planning. It's estate planning and passing those assets on to loved ones. There's a lot that goes into it, and also running all the what ifs in life, not just static projections and numbers. I know you've seen that in your past.
Yeah. We talk about it every day here. We see all these plans coming into us that are people have some plans now, maybe, or half the people that come and talk to us, they talk to us because they don't have a plan. And sometimes it blows my mind. They've been told that they don't need a plan. That's the craziest thing.
The most common answer is, well, let me run this. Okay, let me hit a button. Oh, you're going to be okay.
That was easy.
Right? Or families will ask, hey, what if instead of spending $8,000 a month, what if we spend $12,000 a month? They hit a button, or they'll just tell them,
that was easy.
You'll be okay.
Yeah.
You got plenty of money.
But what does that outcome look like?
Right.
How do you prepare for that outcome?
It doesn't run all the what if scenarios. Yeah. What if inflation gets hot? What if taxes go up? What if my spouse passes and I lose their Social Security, and now I go from filing a joint tax return to a single tax return? What does that do to my taxes?
Yeah.
All those what ifs. What if we have higher healthcare expenses that, unfortunately one of us needs assisted living or nursing home? What you need to stress test the plan.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Well, it's so much, it goes so far beyond that, Kyle. And I would love to know your perspective on this, from prior to you starting your own company, way back when. And all the hoops that you had to go through for your clients to set them up for success when you are with a larger company. But I can tell you one of the big things right now, if you go to some of the larger companies, you go to some of the big name wirehouses, you go to some of these big behemoth names that everyone that is listening to this podcast knows, that they're trying to catch up on this. What they're trying to figure out is how to make sure all of their clients have plans. And they're so basic. They're just like you were talking about. They aren't they're not necessarily stress tested. They're not all encompassing. They're designed to kind of give you an outcome. Well, are you going to be able to retire? Are you not? That's not really a plan. If someone comes in here with $5 million, they're probably gonna be able to retire just fine, unless some catastrophic event happens. But how are we making sure that their plan is meeting their goals in the most optimal way possible? And, a lot of these big names that people are with right now are just catching up to even having plans.
That's right.
Like barely even scratching the surface.
Right. We've been doing tax planning for more than a decade. And it's something that our industry is just now shifting to here in the last couple of years, that they're starting to create some software that does it. They're starting to do a little bit of light training on it. But we do some heavy training, and it's something that we've done for years, and I think it's a strong muscle of ours.
Yeah.
We're really good at it. And not just having an annual conversation about, well, do you have some capital gains that we should be aware of, or maybe you should do a Roth conversion. There's so much more to it than that, and figuring out, looking at a holistic approach of what is a family's lifetime tax? What are you going to pay in taxes over all of your, expenses and income of your lifetime with social? Here's one simple example. I bet I could ask almost any advisor, and in fact, most CPAs, if a family has, a decent income during retirement, just, let's say 60, 70,000 a year. Mm-hmm. That's it. We're going to start low here.
Yeah.
Okay. For most families, 60, 70,000 a year. For a married couple, if I asked an advisor or a CPA, what would most of your Social Security income be taxed at? What rate? Mm-hmm. That rate is around 22%.
Yeah.
And if you're a single person, that rate is over 40%.
Way higher than people think about.
At only a $60,000, $70,000 income.
Yeah.
If you don't have a plan that takes that into account and a plan that actually shows you how to reduce that tax, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. You said it that your plan, if you don't have a plan, then you're not optimizing your financial position. You're not doing the most you can to get ahead and keep the most dollars for you and your family and put yourself in the best position possible to win every day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd go even a step further and kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit here, because there's definitely a point I want to hit on that's really important. But I would challenge anybody out there, go ask your advisor to even talk about taxes. What do you, Kyle? What do you think their answer is going to be?
Well, it's probably going to be the same one that I had when when I was licensed years ago with a portion of Citibank and Smith Barney as our brokerage firm. We were trained to change the subject. Mm-hmm. Right? We weren't allowed to talk about it. The only thing we could talk about on that end was contributing to Roth IRAs, that it had some tax benefits to it. We weren't allowed to talk about much else. We were actually trained to change the subject. Right? We weren't allowed to do tax planning.
Yeah. I mean, when I was at Charles Schwab, it was the same thing. We could talk about the facts of the situation. If I sell this, is that a capital gain? Yes. How is that going to be taxed? Talk to your CPA.
Yep.
Right? When you work in an industry that's so heavily intertwined with your personal taxes, with the outcomes that we produce here for our clients have very tangible, real effects on their tax outcomes. And every financial advisor should be thinking the same way. Well, you've got to be able to talk and think about taxes.
Right.
And it just doesn't happen as often as people think in our industry.
Yeah.
So there's a free one out there for everybody.
Yeah.
If your advisor won't even talk to you about taxes, you have outgrown your financial advisor 100%.
It's a lot of times not the advisor's fault. Their hands are tied. They're just not allowed to. So if we look at the third area, when your circumstances change, but your plan doesn't change, right? Then you may have outgrown your advisor. And, I think a common area in this is you're working and you have a portfolio that's set up, whether, it's something that, your advisor put in place for you or you did on your own, and you head into retirement now and circumstances have changed, but your plan didn't. Your portfolio did not update. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen over the years is that someone before retirement and then now in retirement, their portfolio did not change. It's all the same. It's still maybe heavily growth oriented, whatever it may be. But, it could be all kinds of things. Maybe you go from working to retired. Your plan didn't update and change. There's a death in the family. You have an inheritance, big purchases. Maybe you want to help your kids and grandkids. Your intentions change. Maybe I see that a lot with families where they get into retirement, they're a few years in, and this is I think a tough one for a lot of families where they see a lot of, maybe some friends pass away.
Yeah.
And now they say, you know what, life is too short. We want to spend more money. We want to get out more, right? Did that plan update to really, figure out, can we sustain this change in our spending?
Yeah.
And if so, for how long and so forth, rather than, we need a plan that's dynamic, that can evolve and work with what's going on. Maybe you're subject to RMDs, you're filing for Social Security. There's a lot of things that happen and move along the way. We get updates in our tax laws that have just happened here recently. So when those things happen, how long did it take to update the plan? Did it update? right? Versus something that's just static and moving along.
No, we see that all the time. People come into our office and show us the plans that they have with these other advisors. And that plan document that they have put in front of us, maybe it's like 5-10 years old. And we look at their current statements. We talk to them about what they're talking to their advisor about. It doesn't seem like anything's changed, but they're telling us, either good things have happened in life, really great things, inheritances, things like that. And sorry if anyone's passed away and you have to inherit something like that. That's not the best way to receive a gift of money, right? But okay, now you've got a boon in your life. You've got additional money. That affects your plan. Yeah. In hopefully a positive way. Yeah. But on the flip side of that, we've got people, we see it all the time, and it's really unfortunate, but layoffs happen. Circumstances change in your job, circumstances change in your life, and your plan needs to update with it. And it never does. Yeah. Or,
and I think a piece to speak to there that I always have really been aware of with families, and I work with all of our advisors to make sure that we talk through this with someone, is that when they do inherit money, it's not just taking that number and plugging it in. It's not a number. Oftentimes there's a big emotional piece to that, right? Where, I know that when I years ago inherited a small amount of money from my grandparents. For me, when I inherited that, I didn't just inherit that money. I didn't care about the money. It was a small amount, but it was about the values that I saw from my grandparents, how hard they worked and saved for that money, that I needed to treat that money with respect and take care of it in a way that would make them proud. Sure. And there's an emotional element there that also needs to be built into that plan, right? Yeah. And think about passing on those family values and what's going on there. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a really important one. And we see this all the time as well. A lot of people, their goal for their money is actually to leave it to their kids, or to leave it to someone else, or a charity, or something that's not themselves. They're going to be, they have enough money that they're going to retire and have all this excess, and they have a plan for that excess. Well, we see this as well, where you're talking to your advisor and they're planning for that money the same way they're planning for you. They haven't listened to your financial plan. The circumstances for that money have changed. That money's not for you anymore. You don't need it in the same way that you needed it before. Well, okay, your plan has changed. Your goal has changed. So that money should be invested differently. If I'm leaving money to my kids, and my kids are 8 years old now, and I'm not going to invest it like I am for myself. I'm going to invest it very differently, because they've got a lot longer time horizon. Yep. I want as much, the best outcome for them that they can possibly have. I want them to have the most money. I want it to be as tax efficient as it can be. And that plan is now a different plan. Yep. And we see that all the time. It's invested the same way it was before.
Yep. And if you're not getting that, may have outgrown that situation and that advisor. Yeah. I think another one is, and we've hit on this a little bit as we've talked about, is your portfolio the same in retirement as when you were working? Often our industry, and you saw this at Schwab and Morgan Stanley, I saw, it was preached to us constantly, which is everything's a rule of thumb, right? Someone's near retirement, we're going to go to a 60-40 portfolio. Yep. There's the 4% rule. And I hear this complaint often from families that come in here that are looking for a new advisor, that they go meet with their advisor because they're closer at retirement, and their advisor now wants to shift everything to be conservative, go into a 40 or 4% rule, 60-40 portfolio. We see that often. And not that there's anything wrong with that. Every situation is different.
Yeah, it could be right.
It could be right. Yeah. But oftentimes I don't think it is. Yeah. I think, I want to design a portfolio that's custom to that family, that's going to give them the outcome that they want. It doesn't mean that I need to follow a rule of thumb, scenario off the shelf, just like I did with the family before them. The family misses out on a lot, I think, in that type of scenario, by trying to force them into a box.
Yeah, we call it in the industry a bucketed approach, right? But yeah, a big one. You've absolutely outgrown your financial advisor. If you go into their office and they're doing a little bit of mental math to figure out, okay, well, you're 66, 100 minus 66 is 34. Well, you can have 34% invested in the equity market. The rest is going to be in some fixed income, because that's where you're at, right? That's not truly customized to you. That's not for your goals. That's just a little mental math to make it easy on the advisor. You absolutely outgrown your advisor if they're doing that, or if you walk into their office and they draw a house in front of you and the bottom of this house is your they're going to say it's your foundation, and you can't afford to lose this money. And that 34% is on top of that. That's the 60 that 66 your age is your foundation.
Yeah.
You got 30% on top of that. That's going to be your income or whatever they're going to say it is. And at the top of your house, well, you can afford for a little bit of growth. So you maybe with 4% growth or 10%, 10% of your money can be in that growth sector.
Yeah,
right?
I think if your advisor starts drawing a house on the board about a foundation, the walls and the roof, and they start getting into everything on that, and if they're drawing houses, just like my kids do every day, you've outgrown your advisor.
Yeah.
Okay. Pre-retirement, it's checkers. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Save money, don't get into debt, max out your 401k every year. But when you get into retirement, it goes from checkers to chess. It's much more complex.
Yeah.
Drawing a house on the board isn't going to get you there.
It's like 3D chess. The layers is just more and more complicated. And that, I do want to harp on it, because we talked about it earlier, but a financial plan becomes so much more important than, because you need you got to play chess with your taxes. You got to play chess with your investments. You got to play chess with your estate planning, and all of it becomes intertwined in this 3D board. And that's when you really need an advisor that's fitting your circumstances, your needs, and is answering the questions in the right way, isn't shying away from taxes or any of the other problems that are going to come your way. And, that's what a good advisor is going to do for you.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between the growth stage of your life where, hey, like I just threw money in the stock market and it went up for the last 20 years. And, now I've got a little bit more money and hopefully I can retire, right? A little bit easier to game plan when you're not looking to withdraw that money. Yeah. But as soon as you need access to that money, the entire game changes.
That's when you need a plan. I think a big one, moving into another area here that we see often is if the answer to every problem is to buy in an annuity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
If every problem, if somebody's walking around, every problem looks like a nail, they're walking around with a hammer, and every answer is in an annuity. Selling insurance products on, all the time. That's just not the path. I think, do those products have their place? Yes. Whether you're trying to generate income, you're trying to find a safe place that's a bond alternative, yes. But if that's always the answer, and that they're trying to move every dollar in there, you've definitely outgrown. I wouldn't even say an advisor, but you've outgrown that insurance.
Yeah, I was about to say they're not even an advisor. They're not a consultant or a wealth manager. Whatever name they want to give themselves, they are an insurance agent if that is the only thing that they ever offer.
That's right.
But no, I think that's a really important call out. And there's no problem with these products. We use insurance products here. We use annuities, term care, life insurance, whatever it is. We have it in our tool belt. It is a tool in our tool belt, just like all the other investment options that we have available for our clients here. But if it's the only tool, every nail you have is just a hammer to be hit with an annuity. It doesn't really make much sense. You've absolutely outgrown that advisor because they're not even advising you.
They're not.
They're just selling you another product you don't need.
That's right. That's right. And with those, we never see a financial plan that comes along with the annuity. And I think if we're going to hit on products, I think another one that we see often is not just annuities, but mutual funds, right? If your portfolio is made up of only mutual funds that typically have high commissions, you really lack true diversification. You lack the opportunity to have private investments, such as private equity, private credit, private infrastructure, all those different things in there that truly diversify you. Mutual funds, they were created back in the 80s. It's what we've been taught over the years. It's a great way to diversify. Yeah. Where you can get 100, maybe 120, 150 different stocks inside of a typical mutual fund. That was the reason that, that was the big selling point for years. But now you can find much more efficient paths through ETFs, which is basically the same thing, but much more cost efficient, much more tax efficient. And you saw it at Schwab, right? Where in a Smith Barney, we had an array of funds, but guess what all of our clients got? They all got the Smith Barney funds, which was the brokerage house that we owned, there at Citi. And you saw it at Schwab where I'm sure, it
was all Schwab mutual funds.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. There's a lot to be made behind the scenes, income-wise and money, fee-wise, behind the scenes by putting families in those in-house mutual funds. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's really important for people to understand that, we've been trained, over the last 20 years in the importance of these passive products and the quote-unquote diversification that they offer. But I think you hit on like a phrase that not enough people really need to, really understand, and they really need to. When you said true diversification, you always talk about it, here with our advisors, and just for context, everybody, our advisors meet twice a week for training. We never let up on anything. We're always training. We're always getting better. Another sign that you outgrown your financial advisor is that they're never talking about anything new. They're never training. They never talk about what they're talking about with their other their other advisors, the other pieces of their team. But we talk about it a lot about the need for true diversification, about assets that are not necessarily correlated with each other in a one-for-one nature that the market tends to offer when people have these generic mutual fund 60-40 portfolios. I would love for you to maybe speak a little bit more about that, because I think it's really important for everyone to understand.
Yeah, the generic portfolio off the shelf is just something that, we see all the time. Mm-hmm. And when I worked with families years ago, what I was trained to do is, we had a set of portfolios that we put families in. Still remember the name of them. It's been over 20 years at Smith Barney. I still could tell you about every fund because every family got the same talk. It was just a different allocation based on where they were at in life. Same portfolio off the shelf. They were good portfolios, nothing wrong with them. Mm-hmm. But, what I came to realize after all the years, that I realized that, boy, there's a lot more that I could do for my clients outside of here that I'm constrained right now as to what I can and can't do. And I wanted to be able to do more. So, at the end of the day, what I had to do is I had to take the risk of going and becoming a business owner, open up my own office, take on all the risk, the responsibility, so that at the end of the day, I only answer to my client and I can put them in a much better situation. I've got a full tool belt now and I'm not constrained any longer. At the end of the day, I'm only answering to my client and figuring out what is the best path for them? Yeah. How can I put them in the best position possible to be as efficient as possible? So, we're putting the right plan in place, the right portfolio in place. We're not trying to, put every family into only mutual funds, or every family that comes in here, we're trying to sell an annuity to them. No, it's about what's right for you. Yeah. What outcome do you want? Let's put you in the best position possible.
And it goes the same with all the buzzwords people hear these days. And we talk about a lot. Private investments, are kind of a big buzzword out there right now. And private investments are extremely important. And that's a conversation for a different day, a different podcast. But, if it's the same thing, if you're going in, all you have are private investments and that's all they're putting in front of you, it's the same thing. You've outgrown that advisor. It's the same concept. If you only have one tool in your tool belt, you ain't doing it right. If it's only annuities, you've got a problem. If it's only mutual funds, you've got a problem. If it's only private investments, you've got a problem, right? You have outgrown your financial advisor if you have only got one tool to handle all those things. You mentioned that you have a full tool belt now. It's not even just a full tool belt. It is, a nice wall chest, with ball bearing pull out tools, right? We've got the whole gambit, and every client should have access to all of that.
Right. And the right portfolio typically, the way we want to design it most of the time is where we have 10 to 15, if we can get it, investments that are low in correlation, that they're not tied to one another. Ideally, you would want 10 to 15 non-correlated investments, but it's hard to get zero correlation. That's just about impossible, really, right? But we want as little as possible. So what that does is that smooths out those returns over time. It should, and help to lessen some of those rough times in the market. Yeah. And it keeps that family in the better position. So less loss is good.
Yeah. And just a quick freebie again for everybody. Especially if your portfolio is all in mutual funds or all in ETFs, big red flag that you've absolutely outgrown your financial advisor. If all your investments are the same in every account, same mutual funds, especially if they're the same percentages. But if it's the same funds, the same percentages, every account just kind of looks the same, you've got a problem. You have outgrown your financial advisors. We talked about that 3D game of chess earlier, especially as you head into retirement. This becomes even more important then. And again, probably a topic for a different podcast, but asset location is just as important as asset allocation. And not enough people are hearing that from their advisors.
The other thing that families are not hearing enough of, which I just had this conversation an hour ago with one of our clients. They're ready to retire, came in today. They've been with us for 10 years. Said, look, Kyle, end of the year, December 31st, we're done. We're ready to retire.
It's an exciting moment. Scary moment.
They were on cloud nine. Yeah. They were really looking forward to it. And, one of the things that we talked about that they didn't have this conversation with their previous advisor is tax planning and estate planning.
Yeah.
What we went into was, okay, kids are now off on their own. They're doing well. Let's make sure that we've dotted the I's, crossed the T's on the estate planning piece. And, I've been on them for a little bit about this, and sometimes it takes some pushing, and we've got to do this sometimes. But we started going through the list of everything. They have multiple properties.
Yep.
They've done very well over the years. They're big time savers, but they do have some gaps in their estate plan in terms of what's exposed to probate.
Yeah.
And our job is to have this conversation. And if you're not having this conversation with your advisor, you've probably outgrown them. Are we having conversations about tax planning and estate planning and making sure that there aren't any gaps?
Yeah. Well, this is like a really important addendum to one of the first things we brought up, right? If you don't have a plan, you've outgrown your advisor. Well, if you have a plan, but that plan does not include a tax plan and an estate plan that's projected out over years, and what are the outcomes of those? What are you expected to save? What are you going to do in each year to make sure that you are minimizing those taxes and maximizing those returns on your investment? Then you don't actually have a plan, right? So a lot of people think they have a plan, but then they go and talk to their advisors and they try to bring up taxes. Well, go talk to your CPA. And they go to want to talk about their estate plan. Go talk to your estate attorney. If these are not all incorporated and all these people are not talking to each other, you don't actually have a plan. And and this is no knock against CPAs out there. We know some really excellent CPAs that do fantastic things for our clients, but CPAs look maybe like a year ahead at most. Their job is to look a year back for you. Minimize your tax burden.
They're great historians.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Yep.
And then they might look a year ahead if you got a really good one. They try to help you, especially if it's a small business or something like that. You have to have that. But they're not looking 10 years ahead. They're not looking 20 years ahead. And that's the tax planning you need as part of your investment portfolio. Your investment plan should be incorporated with a tax plan on those investments. And then all of those should be tied into an estate plan for later on. And we bring that up to our the people that we're talking to all the time. All of our clients have this. We have an idea of what to expect for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And we'll adapt on the fly. We just talked about earlier, if your plan isn't adaptable, if your advisor isn't changing your plan as your circumstances change, you don't actually, you've definitely outgrown that advisor. But if you don't have all of those incorporated, you don't have a plan, you don't really have an advisor.
No, there are gaps if you don't have that, right? This one gets me every day. Whether it's the engineer that walks in here with their Excel spreadsheet,
our favorite, right?
Yeah. Or whether it's the advisor, and I see this with the big name companies out there that are on TV all day long talking to you about, we do better when you do better. It doesn't matter. I see this in their quote unquote plans all the time. They use flat rates of projections. They use a tax rate that's a flat rate all the way through, right? They'll project out 18% all the way through every year, no matter which year, whether you're 60 years old, 80 years old, you're always paying 18%. They use a flat rate projection on taxes, a flat rate on inflation, which is often low. They often use a 2%, somewhere around their inflation rate.
I saw one the other day. That's one brought in here. That was 1%.
1%.
For our listeners out there, the Fed rate that they're trying to achieve is double that.
Right.
It's 2%.
Well, I know theirs is off. Right? The Fed fudges that number themselves. We don't need financial planners doing this.
Exactly.
Right? Rates of return. So they use a low inflation rate and they use hyped up or inflated rates of return, usually 6 or 8%. 8% is the one I see often. 8% rates of return, 2% inflation rates. You can make anything look good off of those numbers, but they're not realistic. And so with that, your financial plan year to year is dynamic. You're going to have different tax rates, different rates of return, inflation changes. You need to have a plan that takes all that into account and actually projects all that so that we can see, okay, let's stress test that plan to see how things look when inflation gets high, when rates of return aren't quite as good as we had hoped, right? Maybe taxes go up. How does your plan, what's the outcome? We need to run that and take a look at it before we pull that trigger and say, okay, I'm going to retire today.
And we see it all the time, that flat tax rate that never changes year over year in these plans. We have clients that come in, they're already retired. The rate that they're showing is 18% or 20% or just some random number. And we're looking at their tax return. They're already paying more than that. Right. And their plan is assuming that less. Or we have people come in that haven't retired yet. And how often do we see this, Kyle? I mean, this has got to be one of the biggest hitters we see, is that their plan actually has taxes going lower in retirement.
Right.
How often does that actually happen?
Never, because no one has ever walked in our office and said, Kyle, you know what? Hey, we're used to living on X amount of dollars per year. We're ready to retire, and I want to drop my income and live on less.
Yeah.
No one, I've met with thousands of families over the years, no one has ever walked in here and said that. In fact, you know what they say? They say the opposite.
I want to spend more.
I want to spend more.
Yeah.
Because we're used to living on this, but now we want to travel.
Yeah,
we want to
I've got
get
all this
out.
time
We
on
want to
my
go do
hands.
some things now,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, let's build a plan where we have the same amount coming in with inflation over our lifetime, but for the next 10 or 15 years, we want more so we can go travel and go have some fun. So that's where our industry drops the ball by lowering taxes or telling you that taxes will be less during retirement. They are wrong.
Yeah. 100%. You have outgrown your financial advisor if that's what you're seeing. If you're planning, you ask them, what are the projections for my plan? What are the constants that you're using to get this information? And why are they constant? You ask these questions of your advisor. Yeah. And I'm willing to bet, at least half the time they're not going to have an answer for you.
So we meet with hundreds and hundreds of families a year. Very few of them actually have a plan. The ones that do, what I would look at is read the fine print at the bottom.
Yep.
The fine print at the bottom of the page tells you the assumptions. I would always ask, what assumptions have you made in this plan with inflation, rates of return, tax rates, and so forth? If they're all static and flat, you probably need to fire them.
Yeah.
Move on immediately. Go find someone better, someone that's actually going to take the time, that wants to excel at their craft as an advisor and do the right thing for you.
And this is definitely an outlier, but I think it has to be said. If you're seeing some outlandish numbers in there, question those numbers. People.
Question them.
We saw a plan come in here recently, and it had the client becoming more conservative as they were heading into retirement. Hey, great. Your plan is changing with you. That's a good sign, right? Well, the projections that they were making were that the portfolio was going to produce the same amount of return in this new environment where you're becoming more conservative. And the number was something outlandish. I think it was double digits, like 12%. So you're telling me I'm going to become more conservative and my returns are going to stay the same, but my risk is going to go down.
I don't even know what to say about that. Yeah. That's like, okay, I'm going to let up on the accelerator on my car, but somehow I'm going to keep the same speed.
Yeah, I'm going to speed up. Let's go.
Yeah, that doesn't
make any sense.
You have outgrown your advisor.
Yeah,
100%. If that's happened. Yeah. I think this one here, if your advisor is not independent or a true fiduciary. So when I left Citi years ago, the big issue that I had in that situation was, at the end of the day, I answered to my employer. I did not answer to my clients. And the big brands, they're broker dealers. And at the end of the day, the advisors answer to that broker dealer.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. They can be great people. The example I give oftentimes is, I live in here in Denver. We had Tim Tebow as our quarterback back in 2011, 2010. Love the guy. I want him in my locker room. I want him on my team.
Everyone enjoyed a little bit of Tebow time at the end of the game.
He is a fan. I love him as a person.
Yeah.
He's great. But at the end of the day, I don't want him as my quarterback. I want Peyton Manning on the field. I want the general, the sheriff out there calling the plays, running the organization, running the team, doing his job at the end of the day, right? And so, I think a lot of advisors out there, a lot of them are good people. They have the right intention for their client, but oftentimes their hands are tied as to what they can and can't do.
I mean, so I have worked at some of these big name firms. So you talked about that earlier, and I've known some really incredible people, some of the smartest people that I've worked with that could be incredible advisors, but their hands are tied. It's just that simple. One of the reasons why that is because the people are afraid to leave these bigger companies because it's really hard to go off on your own. How scary was that for you, Kyle, when you did that?
It was, but I'm also entrepreneurial at heart. So
okay, maybe not. Kyle's not a great example.
I love the challenge.
Kyle's a crazy person. Who is always willing to go off the deep end and do the right, to make sure he's doing the right thing. But for most people, it's really scary. So working with a big name like Charles Schwab. It wasn't scary,
but it was hard.
It was incredibly hard.
It was very hard.
Yeah.
It was very
hard
hard.
road, long road.
Yeah, to navigate it all, to figure out, okay, how do I open up an office? How do I market? How do I hire people? How do I, just how do I handle compliance? How do I provide health insurance benefits and 401k? Just doing it all.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I wore every hat for a long time. Luckily, we've been able to hire some fantastic people here where I can hand some of those hats off. Yeah. A director of operations, a director of marketing, our CIO who manages our portfolios, taking those things off of me so that I can focus on running the company. And, I think we're as strong as the people that we have here, which we have a fantastic team. And that has helped a bunch, but it was a lot of work.
Well, we have a fantastic team, but that, comes top down in this instance because we all believe in the vision that we can do better for the people we work with. And that's not to say we're not meeting compliance standards, that we're not doing the best possible work for our clients because we're going off the deep end. It's just we're using all those tools because we're capable of it and we're allowed to do it.
That's right.
And it's, when you go to some of these bigger firms, they're just not allowed to do that because completely honest with everybody, it's really hard to do that.
It is. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of software.
It's hard.
Right. Yeah. This is why we do so much training with our team on a weekly basis. It's why we go out and hire great people. Yeah. I can't hire a C player to come in here and plug them into and be a cog. Yeah. That's not what we want. Yeah.
And I don't know if this has been said on the podcast before, but one of the things I talk about all the time with my team is our mission here at EdgeRock. And our mission is to hire the best people to use the best tools to come up with the best financial outcomes for our clients. It's really that simple for us here. But the very first thing is starting with the best people, and that's incredibly hard. We ask a lot of our advisors here, way more than you're going to see at most firms. They're not building little houses on a whiteboard for everybody here. No,
my kids can do that.
Yeah. We ask a lot of our advisors, and expect a lot out of them, but that's because the people we work with expect a lot out of them. We're talking about the financial futures of all the clients we're working with. We take that responsibility, that fiduciary responsibility, really seriously. You've got to limit everything because otherwise you're going to run into some compliance problems.
Right.
Where if you're doing it our way here and we're keeping it tight, we're only hiring the best people. We're not a tens of thousands person organization, and we can keep a tighter eye on this.
Easily said, not easily done.
Not easily done at all.
We go to work every day.
Yeah.
I think the last big one here that I really want to hit on, which I think is kind of a little bit of a secret in our industry, which is
biggest secret. Yep.
So it takes some work to figure this one out. But if your advisor isn't making the portfolio decisions, and they don't know why you're in some of the investments that you're in, if they're not the one truly sitting up front and piloting the plane, truly making the decisions of where you should be invested, if they're not the ones that are doing that and it's coming from some other location, it's coming top down, like it was on me for years, then you truly have outgrown your advisor. And I think this is one of the things that makes us unique, is that those decisions start and stop within the four walls of this office with our CIO, top down, where we're making those decisions. We're vetting out which investments our clients should be in. We don't go outside of here to make those decisions. No. Our investment committee is here. We make those decisions in-house. If you know more than your advisor about, some of the investments, if, your advisor isn't truly the one making those decisions, if they have to go someplace else to get an approval on, can I put my client in this investment? If they're constrained on which investments they can offer, that's just not how we want to design things for our clients in the portfolios here.
Yeah, well, we've hinted at it throughout this entire conversation, but a lot of advisors are constrained. The tool belt is very limited, but it goes beyond that. They're not actually making the decisions that are there to impact you. They're not flying the plane. You're telling them where to go, and they're outsourcing those decisions. And it's, we talked about it a lot with a bucketed approach. You're going to hear that in our industry a lot. Some people may know what that means. Just a quick explanation for everybody. It's, hey, I had you take a quiz that determined, how risk adverse you are. And it said you're moderate aggressive. Well, guess what? I've got one of my 5 portfolios is moderate aggressive, and that's where you're in now. And I as the advisor have not made that decision for you. I haven't picked the different the different aspects of your investment allocation to fit your goals. I just think you're moderate aggressive, so I'm going to put you in a moderate aggressive, and then we'll become more conservative over time as you get a little older.
Right. And the makeup of that moderate aggressive portfolio, the advisor didn't choose that. Someone else chose that makeup.
Yeah.
And as the economy, as the market changes and that moderate aggressive portfolio changes, someone else is making the decisions on what investments, ETFs, mutual funds, stocks should be in there.
Yeah.
And the advisor's going along with it. It's rarely the choice of the advisor that, it's rarely something that we see where they're actually making those decisions. Here's the makeup of the portfolio. And often, and really what I would say is if your advisor is making those decisions and running the business and doing the marketing and doing it all, they're spread out too thin, right? They can't do all that. No. And that's why, we went out and hired a chartered financial analyst, a CFA, to run our portfolios as our chief investment officer.
Shout out to Rob Foss.
Rob is fantastic.
One of the smartest people I know.
He is the smartest person I know, next to my wife. And, so having a CFA in-house, right, to make those decisions, that is a separator in our industry.
And we're not advocating for your advisor to be a stock picker, right? That's the last thing you want. You've outgrown your financial advisor if they're stock picking for you individual stocks. Probably not the right solution for most individuals. But ultimately, our advisors here, we have different portfolio options that they could pick from, and a lot of that is managed by our CIO. So there's portions of your account that our advisors aren't directly managing, but what they're doing is they're choosing the proportions of your various accounts and making sure that it's set up appropriately with those proportions and that they're picking the right private investments and alternative investments and decorrelated things to include in that portfolio. Like we hit on that earlier, the 8 to 15 different types of investments you should have in your portfolio to make sure it's really, truly diversified. Our advisors are the ones picking that for your specific circumstances. And that's really rare.
That is rare, and it's fantastic. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that gives our clients the outcomes that they're looking for. For them to sit down, on a daily basis with Rob and say, "Hey, here's this client. This is what they're trying to achieve. This is the outcome." That's where we always start. What outcome does the client want? Great. Now, what kind of portfolio do we want to design? We're sitting there looking at full tool belt, everything that we want here. Okay, which tools do I need to give this client the outcome that they're looking for income, for tax-aware investing, for growth, whatever, inheritance, whatever it is. Let's look at this full assortment of tools here and start from the beginning, build it ground up, design it the way we want. We have Rob involved in all that, our analysts involved. I'm always available. I'm looking at that and discussing it with them. So, and it's a custom situation for every family.
Yeah, it's particular to your circumstances. And that gets lost in the shuffle for most people. They get that bucketed approach. They get, I'm in one of those 5 buckets that they have. And, that may be okay for someone in their growth stage of their life. But I'd argue that if you're in one of those buckets, you're probably just in some, generic ETFs that you could have just put it in by yourself, put in the S&P 500 and let it ride and been pretty similar. So you've outgrown your financial advisor if that's the approach that they're taking, because it's not for you. Your plan should be for you. Your advice should be for you. And if your advice is for anyone that's in a moderate allocation or moderate aggressive or conservative or whatever, that, the survey that they had you take says you are, that advisor isn't for you, and you've outgrown them because it's never been for you in the first place.
This has been great.
Yeah.
When I think about, these 10 key areas that, families can use to help identify, whether or not you have outgrown your advisor. I think these 10 are pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And these would be red flags that I would want to identify and want to know. How does this affect me, and how does it affect my outcome for me and my family? Because each one of them are vitally important, and little changes in the plan, whether it's a small inflation rate or how, me trying to figure out how am I going to file for Social Security, or if I have a gap in my plan, that's going to affect me and my family a lot. And so each one of these areas, I think, are areas to pay attention to, because at the end of the day, it means a lot. And, if any of these pop up as red flags, then you've probably outgrown your financial advisor, and you might want to have a conversation with someone to figure out, is there a better answer for me and my family?
You nailed it.
Awesome. Hey, what I'd love for families to do, if you have questions, let us know what questions you have, regarding these different areas. We'd love to answer those for you. Like and subscribe below. Another episode of Rock Talk here. Great to have you on. With your experience in the past with Schwab and Morgan Stanley. You've seen a lot, I've seen a lot, but what we work to do is elevate. We want to be in a different position so we could do more for our clients and continue to move along.
Yeah, we want the best for everybody.
That's right. That's what we always say, the best. All right. Thanks for being on, Chase. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.